Mediterranean diet, they're more following the Mediterranean diet, the effects of particles go down, down, down. So that's confirmation that it's consistent with the fact that oxidative stress is causal. Just quickly on the question of COVID and viruses, this is some work Lisa Brousseau did, and just showing that we generate particles about 1 micrometer in diameter from speaking and voluntary coughing. So if we're talking or singing or we generate these very small particles, and those tend to linger in the air. Whereas if you're sneezing, these are huge particles, and they only last about 8 seconds. I know we all say, "Oh my God, you sneezed," and we want to get away from that person, but those particles disappear. It's when they're talking in your face that you should be worried, because those particles stay in the air for a much, much longer time and have a very slow settling. So for 1 micron has a settling time of about 16 hours. So yes, they do dilute, but they hang around a long time. They linger. And again, it's known that the central thing here is we have impaired antiviral immune signaling that happens from exposure to particles. And so it reduces your ability to fight off viruses, including COVID. And here's just another demonstration that the small particles that we generate while talking linger in the air a lot longer than we think. And also, this just showed, this is the work done by, again, Lisa Brousseau, looking at comparing, or at least she made up the slide based on the research that's out there. And basically, when both people are wearing N95s, you can be in the same room for a long time. This is the original COVID, not what we have now. But so it'd be shorter now. But depending on how much protection each person has, then you can be in the same room for a longer period of time safely. But if you're wearing an N95 and the other person is wearing nothing 2.5 hours. So that's why I wear an N95 whenever I'm indoors in public. So just overall, I think, that breathing these particles has systemic effects. They have their own toxicity and they're a vector for other things, other airborne toxicants and viruses. And as was mentioned before, just as the climate policy implications, basically we have to lower CO2. And so if we want to get the maximum health benefits out of it, we ought to be focusing on fossil fuel burning as reducing that, because that will give you the greatest health benefits along with the reduction in CO2. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thurston, for a very illuminating talk on the role of fine particles in the air and how it affects us. And we will move on to the next talk, and that is by Professor Terry Gordon. And he'll be speaking on particulate matter toxicity, that is PM toxicity. The role of particle composition and toxicity is influenced by particle size, urban and rural sources, and seasonality. So may I request Professor Terry Gordon, who's a professor of environmental medicine at NYU School of Medicine. And his basic research interests includes inundational technology, toxicology. And the major focus of his research lab has been in the identification and understanding of the role of individual susceptibility factors which affect pathogenesis of various inhaled environmental and occupational agents. So Professor Terry Gordon, please.
Thank you. I'm going to continue to talk about particle composition and how that might influence toxicity, looking at particle size, rural versus urban particles, a little bit of different sources, and also by season. So looking at translational evidence of how composition might drive PM toxicity, I tend to think of this series of studies that was done largely by the US EPA as some of the best evidence. They took advantage of this steel mill closing. There was a strike by workers, so the mill was closed for about a year, 1986-87, and you can see on the left the PM concentrations, except for the peaks, didn't change too much during that period. But looking on the right, you see during the steel mill closure, there was a decrease in monthly bronchiolitis and asthma hospital admissions for all ages. So there's evidence that something was going on. And to look at this more closely, the EPA researchers collected particles. They'd already been collecting particles during that time. They extracted them and they look at the metal content, which, as Dr. Thurston has said, is an important toxic component of PM. And they showed that the total amount of metals was much lower during the strike, and that copper, zinc, and iron vastly increased on the non-strike periods. And when you take those particles and you instill them into the airways of human subjects, they found, looking at airway injury using protein as the index, that during the strike period in 1987, there was much lower levels of protein in the airway lavage. If you did this in rats, they found a similar thing where protein in the bronchoalveolar lavage was decreased during the strike period particle treatment. And when you treated cells, Dr. Frampton, University of Rochester, found similar things, looking at interleukin-6 production by airway cells. It's an inflammatory marker. And then you can see that in the light blue period, 1987, both at a low and high concentration of PM, the IL-6 production was much lower. So you have evidence from cells all the way up through humans, as well as source material, that something was going on here. So based on a lot of these kind of information, we hypothesized that composition and size drive PM toxicity. And as George just said, drives also the adverse respiratory and cardiovascular effects. So urban versus rural particles, season, winter versus summer, city, and of course, source. So I'm just going to talk about these 15 minutes, 2 NYU studies that we did. One, the Health Effects Institute sponsored, where we sampled particles in 5 cities in the United States. And then another EPA-sponsored study where we sampled PM at urban and rural sites, not only in New York City area, but in California. So the HEI project, this just shows collecting large amounts of particles with a high volume cascade impactor to collect particles at different sizes across the United States, the Northwest, where you have some wood smoke going on, of course, Los Angeles, heavy traffic, and a control site was Tuxedo, New York, which is mostly forested, Midwest, and of course, Manhattan. We collected, as I said, in summer and winter on a daily basis. So we characterized the particles, and now we wanted to apply what we knew about the particle characteristics to toxicity. There's a number of assays we did, but I'm only going to focus on reactive oxygen species, which, as Dr. Thurston said, is a pretty big driver of systemic toxicology and lung inflammation in mice. So we went to look at how oxidative stress is influenced by all the PM variables we were looking at. And we found that if you look at oxidative stress on the y-axis and you look at summer versus winter, there were differences. These box plots, these are hundreds of samples, and this was statistically significant. So summer had more of an effect than winter. Coarse, fine, and the ultrafine particles, surprisingly coarse particles cause toxicity up there with the ultrafine. And when you look at cities, we found that there were significant inter-city differences. And when you look at the statistics, it showed that the site or the city was significant as far as contributing to toxicity, in this case, oxidative stress. For the 2 different cell types you looked at, size mattered and season mattered. But that was, if you look at that, that's the coarse, fine, ultrafine particles, for example, from every city, from all seasons. So we wanted to look at this a little more detailed. And so this shows the interaction of season size and location, a little bit more complicated, but 2 cities, Los Angeles and Tuxedo. And we looked at summer and winter. And it's a little small to see, but up at the top, it's coarse, fine, and ultrafine particles, summer and winter for each. And you can see there is a pattern. In the coarse particles, winter were more toxic than summer, but for the smaller particles, the summer prevailed. And this occurred in Los Angeles, and the same pattern was seen in Tuxedo, New York, the control rural site. Now, if you looked at this day by day, you find that on the 12 days that we sampled in Los Angeles, just focusing on the summer ultrafine particles, we found that there was a huge day-to-day variability. Whether this was due to weekend versus weekday traffic patterns, it's not clear. And this extreme day-to-day variability was not seen in our rural site, and that made sense. So we asked ourselves, what drives the toxicity? And as Dr. Thurston hinted at, we looked at oxidative stress and try to see how it correlates with the elements. In this case, we're looking specifically at copper. And we found that, at least for these three cities, the coarse particles, Los Angeles, Manhattan, and Seattle, there was a pretty good correlation. The higher the copper concentration, the greater the oxidative stress. And not surprisingly, the highest oxidative stress was caused by the particles collected in Los Angeles on July 4th celebrations. So when we, in collaborations with Dr. Thurston, of course, we wanted to look at source. Using all the elemental data we had, we found that there was a pretty strong correlation. The higher the amount, the traffic caused a greater oxidative stress. And this was across summer and winter in 5 different cities, whereas surprisingly, residual oil did not have a significant effect on oxidative stress. So the HEI study, we concluded clear support that particle composition drives PM toxicity. Summer samples elicited a greater oxidative stress than winter, and that transition metals in the particles, such as copper, vanadium, et cetera, were significantly correlated with our oxidative stress responses. So you could say, so what? These are cells, high concentrations. So we wanted to know if these in vitro results would reflect changes in vivo, as was done by the Utah studies. So we treated mice with particles by aspiration into the lungs. And again, a little complicated, but looking at neutrophils on the y-axis as an index of inflammation in the bronchoalveolar lavage. And this is, we took 4 cities, the particles from 4 cities, Seattle, Utah, New York City, Bronx, and Sterling Forest. And you can see that the red curves were higher. Of course, that's a higher dose than the blue 25 microgram dose. And you can see that there was patterns. So for instance, the Bronx caused more inflammation injury than Sterling Forest. And similar things were found, similar curves for coarse, fine, and ultrafine particles. So we concluded that as in the Utah study, the in vitro toxicity seemed to parallel the in vivo toxicity. So we wanted to take this a step further, and we looked at comparative toxicity, really focusing on rural and urban particles. The design was copied from European scientists. It wasn't that original. And we looked at urban and rural sites in New York City down here in the bottom red box with the Bronx just northeast of it, and then 3 rural sites. I think this was Manhattan, right outside our current lab. Over here on the upper right is where Dr. Thurston has some sampling equipment located that we used. And I think that our rural sites were rural enough. So we also did the study, but I'm not going to talk about the data particularly in California, where we looked at rural sites. Up here on the far left, there was a site right off the ocean, and then different Central Valley, California sites where there was cities, and then such as Fresno and Davis, but also rural sites where there was mostly farming. So again, we know that individual factors affects and drives toxicity. In this case, we just want to focus on urban and rural. And this is what we found. When you look at the effects, and this is again looking at oxidative stress, and you look at by city, you notice a pattern here where the Bronx and Manhattan particles for this given dose of PM on the cells caused higher oxidative stress than all 3 of the rural sites. And this still held true when we looked at it summer in red versus winter. Manhattan and Bronx patterns still greater in summer and winter. So we can conclude overall that size, season, and site, that is urban versus rural cities or areas, influence oxidative stress in particular when you look at these things in vitro. Generally, and quite surprisingly, the coarse particles seem to have a greater effect than the fine particles. In general, winter was greater than summer. Wasn't repeatable or reproducible from our two studies in New York City, actually. Seasons changed. And in general, urban particles were greater than the rural samples. So we believe that the PM composition needs to be analyzed to get a better understanding of these toxic effects. So to close, obviously this is US-centric research, and that's our results for this one country in North America. People have done similar studies in Europe and in China, but in particular, let's think about what about PM in countries, other countries, particularly maybe India. One has to consider agricultural residue, which we were instructed with what we're supposed to say rather than burning crop waste. There's other biomass burning to be considered, celebratory fireworks as might occur during Diwali, smelting kilns, seasons do make an effect. Do they make an effect in other countries? Dr. Thurston and I have been wondering how the PM health effects can be studied during the monsoon season, given the difficulties in sampling during downpours of rain. One also has to consider the completeness of electronic health data collection, and this is important in epidemiology. There are some countries in Northern Europe where there's complete collection of all health data coming out of the hospitals, whereas there's other countries where it's less precise. So I just conclude saying there's the need for complementary epidemiology, cell, and in vivo studies to really answer these questions, to find out what is driving systemic toxicity of ambient particles that we inhale. So I want to thank these people, in particular, Dr. Lung-Chi Chen, and of course, the sponsors. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Derry Gordon, for taking us through the role of particulate matter composition, size, seasonality, and how they affect our health. And we come to the last speaker of the day before the panel discussion, and that is, I would like to invite Dr. Ghazala Habib. She is associate professor at IIT Delhi, and she's an expert in air pollution monitoring, characterization of aerosols and their impacts on health. And she will be speaking to us on particulate matter size, how composition and influence of aerosols affects health. And this will be a perspective from India.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah, awesome. Okay, so good evening, everyone. So today I'm trying to give a brief idea about. I think much has been said about health effect of particulate matter, its size and composition. So I will just briefly go through the introduction. But what research we are doing here at IIT Delhi, that is what I would like to focus. Slides. Okay, here. Oh. Yeah. Can you?
Yeah.
So, aerosol size, composition, influence on health, Indian perspective. So already many global burden of disease as well as at regional level have already reported that there is an increase in death rate, mortality rate due to air pollution in last few decades. And in this presentations also, it has been said that one of the main diseases CVD, right, cardiovascular disease, and other respiratory disease. However, if you can see that recent study by Pandey et al, they have estimated the 1.67 million death due to air pollution. Out of that, 0.98 million is because of the outdoor air pollution, and 0.61 million death is because of indoor air pollution or household air pollution. So having said that, we can see that there is a greater increase in mortality rate due to outdoor air pollution, and these burden of diseases are estimated based on the dose response curve available for developed countries, not for India. So there is uncertainty in these estimates. However, at regional level, it's not reflecting, the change of slide is not reflecting over here. I have changed the slide, but it's not reflecting over there. Why is this so?
ये निकाल दिया था that is ये बंद हो गया yeah we'll just so इसको ना do not remove this.
No, I'm not okay. Okay. So here, here we can see that, but the particle are emitted from various sources. The regionally important sources in India are vehicular traffic, biomass fuel combustion in cooking stove, which is solid fuel combustion in cooking stove, then open biomass burning, brick kiln, and power generation. These are the major sources in India related to air pollution, and basically related to PM 2.5 emissions. So as it has been already said that the particles are emitted primarily as a solid or liquid particles, but they also form in the atmosphere due to gas to particle conversion. And these secondary particles are very fine in size, and the size can vary from few nanometer to few micrometer in size. Okay. So because of this very, very fine particle, which are ultra fine particle, generally 100 nanometer or low, this can penetrate very deep into lung and can affect even the oxygen, oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. They hinder the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood or oxygen transfer. And that is why they are toxic. That is what is known as the oxidative stress. They actually cause, antioxidant. They actually dysfunction or may cause the problem with the antioxidant in the blood. Okay, so this mechanism has been already explained. So here we can see that the PM can cause, there are several diseases: cardiovascular, lung cancer, respiratory disease, and these diseases have evidence to link with the air pollution. However, there are new emerging evidences are coming for other neurological disease and all. What is not known for India is there are limited information on dose response curve, and the curve for other countries are being used. Then association with the aerosol size and composition is very hazy. We don't know certainly what is going on with respect to size or composition, because there are limited measurements only, and association with co-pollutants is also poorly understood. So there are many studies have been done in past, and these are the major studies which are done in South India as well as in Delhi, and but still the link between particulate matter properties or characteristics and disease or occurrence of epidemics is missing. So what we are doing at IIT Delhi is we started this work in 2008, and first we have done toxicological study where we have collected the particle at roadside as well as at 30-meter height, and we have seen the composition of whole PM 2.5, not size segregated, but the PM 2.5 mass, and tried to link it with cell line viability, means cell death, okay, lung cell death. And we have found that the seasonally, the size segregated PM concentration has shown that ultrafine particle, which are less than 250 nanometer in size, are contributing major mass to total PM, okay. And the cell line toxicity or cell viability for this ultrafine particle are much more higher than total PM 2.5. So that is the major finding. So that means just assessing the composition and effect of PM 2.5 as a whole will not give us an idea about what is going on. We have to see the size segregated and composition and its link with the toxicity. So this is also the same thing here. It shows the ROS, reactive oxygen species generation, and it was high from a very small size particle, 250 nanometer or less. And also you can see that this was high during pre-monsoon season, though the mass during pre-monsoon season was lower than winter and post-monsoon season, but its toxicity level or ROS production was high. And probably one of the reason is during pre-monsoon season we get the air mass from regional regional area which are loaded with dust particle, and probably it is bringing some of the very toxic elements, trace elements with it, and causing high ROS production. But this has to be investigated because we don't have chemical composition of PM, size segregated PM. So that has to be investigated in future. So that is what we have found. And then we started another study based on our previous finding. We tried to see what is the link or what is the association of CVD parameter, not CVD, ECG parameters with the PM 2.5 mass and its size. Okay. So here you can see that we have done a survey. 500 questionnaire survey was done, and out of that 120 subjects which were healthy were chosen based on their health status, their medical history, if they are a smoker or non-smoker. And for choosing the subject, we have taken the help of doctor from AIIMS. Dr. Sandeep Singh worked with us, as well as the experts from environmental side. And after choosing those subjects, we carried out the health monitoring using Holter system and personal PM monitor. And we have, after removing the noise from the data, the 50 subjects or 50 samples were included in this study for final interpretation. And the different instruments which were used in this study are shown here. And we have found that there is a very strong association between PM1 and PM 2.5 mass concentration with the different ECG parameter, including SDNN, RMS, DD, and PNN50, etc. And you can see their association is very close. There is not much difference between PM1 and PM2.5. However, in case of SDNN, the association was different, and the reduction in SDNN due to PM2.5 was larger than PM1. Okay, and one of the reason could be that PM1 is totally anthropogenic emission. It comes totally from the anthropogenic emission. However, our previous study has also found that there is some very fine dust, probably cement or something, is also there, also present there. But PM1 comes from vehicle or any other anthropogenic combustion sources, while PM2.5 contains dust, resuspended dust also. So here, it means the message is we need to see both tailpipe and non-tailpipe emission, their effect on health parameters. So not only the anthropogenic sources are important, but the resuspension of dust in Delhi is also important. So this study is not from our, our group. However, this study is showing that there are effect of particle number concentration. So we did not see the effect of particle number concentration in our work, but previous studies have already shown that number concentration may have very different effect than mass. Okay, the association would be very different, and therefore so therefore we need to have to include the number, mass, composition, all these parameters while studying the health effect of the particulate matter. So here you can see the PNC, which is particle number concentration of and PM2.5 particle per centimeter cube. You can see there is no direct relation between mass and number. What does it mean? That we cannot use mass or number as a proxy for each other. If we are doing any study, we should include both number concentration measurement as the mass concentration measurement separately. Okay.
Dr. Ghazala,
this is the last slide. So the conclusion from this presentation are: the current literature, though limited in nature, suggests that ultra-fine particle and quasi-fine particle have the potential to cause equal or more damage to health as compared to PM2.5. So everybody is focusing on PM2.5. All the regulatory body in India says they measure PM2.5 and because it is causing health damage, but the level of damage, health damage due to ultra-fine particle is different than PM2.5. Okay, so we cannot take PM2.5 as a proxy for health effect. So what we are suggesting, we have to have simultaneous measurement of different PM properties and health parameters. So this is our upcoming study where we are trying to have the real-time monitoring of all chemical characteristics of PM2.5 and ECG parameter as well as spirometric parameter. So that is all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ghazala. I would please join us on stage on the panel. And may I now request Professor Randeep Guleria and Professor Balram Bhargav. Both of them need no introduction to anybody in India. They are the stalwarts who have pioneered, who have held India through its COVID pandemic. And we invite you, sir, for a panel discussion. May I request Dr. Prabhakaran to conduct the panel.
Thank you, Nitish. I think if I have to summarize what I've understood in these three talks, is essentially to say that PM 2.5 is not a single entity. There are multiple things in PM 2.5. We need to understand what constitutes this PM 2.5. And there is a kind of different species and different things cause different problems. It depends on where we are doing it, where we are measuring it, when we are measuring it, how we are measuring it. So it's a whole lot of complex things that have been presented, but in simple terms, PM 2.5 is not a single entity. There are multiple entities. That's a take-home message that I have. So welcome to this panel, Professor Guleria. I think we have heard that air pollution seems to have different health effects. Many people have been arguing that the scientific evidence is not very robust. And at least 5 years back, people said, whatever evidence that we have is not very clear, very tenuous. So are you convinced that we have enough evidence now to say that, yes, air pollution has clear links to many of the diseases that have been reported today?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. I think the evidence is clear-cut. I don't think we really need to reinvent the wheel, if I put it that way. We have enough evidence of the harmful effects of air pollution. And as you had shown in your slide, it's not only as far as the lung is concerned, it causes systemic inflammation. There are a large number of studies from India and abroad which shows that even inflammatory markers in the blood are high. It affects the heart, the brain, and various other organs. There have been a large number of papers also from India which have shown this. We have just completed a study in 2019 where it was a multi-centric study in Delhi looking at admissions for the acute respiratory problem in children and adults throughout the year in the emergency department. And we could really show a link between visits with respiratory problem in the emergency and poor quality air. This happened in the subsequent 5 to 6 days. And this was more during days when air quality was bad throughout the year. So this was a 2-year study which was funded by ICMR, which clearly showed that there was a link between hospital admissions, hospital visits, and air quality, poor air quality. A similar study was done many years ago by Dr. Pandey also from AIIMS. This was done what I call the pre-CNG era. That was before CNG came into Delhi. And if you remember the late 80s, there was a huge issue of pollution being very high. And that study also showed a similar thing, but that was only from one center. So I think there is enough data. And even if you look at that Lancet study, which was quoted, the burden of disease in India in 2017, 1.6 million deaths, it clearly showed that for ischemic heart disease, for COPD, for respiratory infections, the disability-adjusted life years was higher because of air pollution than that was for tobacco. So we focus a lot on tobacco cessation, but that data showed that in India, we must focus more on air pollution than on tobacco cessation.
Right. Thank you. Just one follow-up question, because you have been talking so much about COVID. You've been appearing on TV every other day on COVID-related issue. One question which a lot of people have been asking is, does air pollution increase viral transmission? Does it increases the lethality of the virus? So what's your take on that?
So again, there is data, and it does so that the link between morbidity, mortality, and air pollution. As a matter of fact, there is one data which is published during the SARS outbreak from China. And that paper showed that in districts in China where air pollution was bad, they had higher mortality during the SARS outbreak as compared to those districts where air pollution was less. More recently, there is a paper published from Italy during the outbreak, the COVID outbreak in Italy, which showed a very nice graph where in districts in Italy where pollution levels are high, they had higher mortality. And I think early this year, there is a paper in the Blue Journal in the American Review of Critical Care Medicine from the US. They've taken US data and have just extrapolated air quality indices and COVID mortality, and again shown a link that in areas in the US where air quality was bad, they had higher mortality because of COVID-19. So I think there is a data which suggests that not only transmission, but as we had seen, airway inflammation, which occurs due to pollution, further gets aggravated by the virus, and that causes a higher morbidity and mortality. So again, the link between non-infectious diseases and infectious diseases, both, is there as far as air pollution is concerned.
Right. Thank you. Professor Bhargav, you've recently written a book on the journey to vaccine production in India. I mean, it's a phenomenal book. In that, you brought out the concept of one world, one health. So I think this is a very important, because whatever we do in terms of any thing that we want to mitigate, even air pollution, we are thinking from a human angle. It's about human beings. How important is it to address all the living beings of this world? Why is it important, and how is it important?
See, we have to remember one thing. We've had an excellent presentation today, all 4 of them, which is phenomenal and started by you. We are convinced that pollution is bad. There is no confusion about that pollution is bad. Now, when we talk of one health, and when we talk of animal health, human health, viral diseases, non-communicable diseases, and when we talk of the world as Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, world citizenship, we have to remember a few facts. The pointers have always been skewed in favor of the West. If you look at today, which is the most polluting country in the world, top 5. Can anyone try to guess which is the top in the world? No. The top most polluting country in the world today is China, contributing to 30% of the pollution. Now look at their population, 1.5 billion. So per human being, it may be less. What is USA? Is 15%. What is India? 7%. Then is Russia, 5%. Then is China, 4%. Now we know that as urbanization happens, more and more pollution happens. And we also know that what is the incidence of cancers? Just to give you a perspective. In a village in India, it is about 30 per 100,000. In a small city is about 50 to 60 per 100,000. In a big city is about 80, 90 per 100,000. What is it in the Western world? 300 per 100,000. So when we have a large population, we are in the limelight. So we are targeted. So we have to be very clear about that fact that particles are a problem, pollution is a problem. We are one of the countries which started laws for air pollution as early as 1981. So I think from that perspective, we have to take into account which country is responsible for how much pollution. Now you are polluting with fossil fuels and you have developed your nation. And now you start harping to the rest of the world, don't use fossil fuels. When China is developing and now has reached 30%, and they're using too much of fossil fuels, and now they have become developed and become a competitor. So then you sell them that you are not going to pollute. So from that perspective, I think it has to be, every country has to play a role. In India, we adopt laws much faster. If you look at the COVID, what we have learned, how the use of mask, how the use of lockdown, we are much more, probably a more disciplined society when it comes to these kind of health matters. Look at the use of electric vehicles. The adoption in India, the sales has, it is 12% this year. 12% of total vehicles sold is suddenly 12% in India. So we are ready to adopt new things. We are ready to do the change. But every citizen in the world has to be responsible if you're looking at that concept. And if you look at the phone today, this is saying air quality 269 poor, may cause breathing discomfort with prolonged exposure and discomfort for people with heart disease and short exposure. So this fear and paranoia also has to be kind of handled carefully. We shouldn't have that, because urbanization is what is responsible for a lot of it. So we have to plant trees. We have to make the cities greener, and that is going to take care of fossil fuels. Will be used, will have to be used. India has made a pledge by 2050, we'll make it 75%. But I think, and we will probably go the same way as China is today in 10, 15 years from now. We may become 30% contributors with time to come. But everyone has to go over that hill, and then we can target other countries who are trying to develop and tell them not to use fossil fuels. So that fear and paranoia has to be removed. And the last point that I want to make is that aerosols and particles are good also because we use them for drug delivery. We use all these particles for drug delivery for various respiratory conditions. So we have to take it with a pinch of salt.
Right.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. One question that I wanted to ask you is, as a regulator, there are multiple things actually in terms of mitigation of air pollution and addressing climate change. What do you think is one important thing, if you're asked to address? What is that one important thing that you would address for mitigating air pollution?
I think the best thing that has happened in India is the Ujjwala Yojana. The more than 8-9 crore families have got rid of cooking with the fossil fuels inside their house. And that has made a difference. And we have the Daphne study and the other study from the CARE, which is from ICMR, which has clearly shown that low birth weight was associated with that. So that is one thing. But one point here, again, I want to emphasize is that so many diseases are there, heart diseases. The other thing is that as longevity is increasing, life expectancy in India is now 70 years. We are seeing more of neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and some of that may be related to air pollution. And that is a little cause of worry as far as urban India is concerned.
Right. Thank you. So let me go to the virtual world. Rajesh, can you hear me? Rajesh,
yes, thank you.
Okay. So I think you're working on a demonstration of how to mitigate indoor air pollution. So one question that I have is, how do you ensure a safe and clean indoor environment in the face of high ambient air pollution? So we have high external air pollution. How do you make your homes safer in terms of air pollution? What are the things that we can do? I mean, Dr. Bhargava mentioned about the Ujjwala scheme, but what are the others that you can think of?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity, first of all, to be joining this very esteemed panel. I really consider myself fortunate to be part of this, although not in person, virtually. But thank you so much for allowing me to be here. The topics presented today, obviously critically important. Let me just preface my response by making a comment that I would like to sort of see us think about air safety and air quality in the same way that we think about water safety and water quality. When we think about drinking water, we obviously think about needing to make sure that the drinking water is safe from not just a pollutant perspective, but also an infectious perspective. And if there's anything that has been highlighted in the context of the recent COVID pandemic, that we should really be thinking about air safety and air quality in an analogous manner, that we should be thinking about air quality and air safety from both a pollutant perspective as well as an infectious perspective. So, and I think using the examples and histories from creating safe water for individuals, I think can be helpful for us as we think about air quality and air safety as well. Now, the specific question of how do you ensure air safety and air quality in the context of ambient or outdoor air pollution, obviously very challenging. People are going inside and outside of their homes. They're opening doors. They may open windows. There may be leaks that allow outdoor air to come in. And again, from the context of thinking about air safety and air quality, and you think about infectious sources potentially that are inside homes or inside buildings, we really need to think very carefully about how to proceed. I think that really the next century will look at air quality and air safety from an industrial hygiene perspective. That we really need to think about how to make our spaces where we live, where we work, and where we play safe. So our homes, our schools, our workplaces. And I think that in addition to thinking about source control, which is, let's say, for example, what has been mentioned before already, shifting away from biomass fuels to lower carbon emitting, or at least cleaner carbon emitting fuels. maybe even thinking about leapfrogging even more, decarbonized electrification and electric stoves, for example, maybe leapfrogging the technology, just like India and other countries have been able to leapfrog many decades of technology with respect to mobile phones and the apps and capabilities of mobile phones. This presents an opportunity potentially. And I think that the comments that were made about, the challenges in the sort of geopolitical sphere with respect to recommendations, let's say, quote unquote, coming from the West, I think obviously need to be taken into account, very important. But I think there is also the opportunity for leapfrogging that I think allows India to be able to have an opportunity to demonstrate to the rest of the world how this can happen in a way that's both beneficial from a health perspective as well as from an economic development perspective. The second, obviously, is to think about filtration within the context of air in the home. And so air filters, personalized masks if necessary. Obviously, in the context of COVID, again, we've all gained experience with both of those. And, as you know, Dr. Prabhakar, we are in the process of conducting a trial related to testing whether use of indoor air purifiers in the home can improve cardiovascular outcomes for individuals with heart failure. So that's one small research project that may help contribute to a growing literature on the use of indoor specific modalities to try and provide better filtration. And then, you can think about whether it's disinfecting infectious air or depolluting pollutant air inside, obviously, in larger spaces. You can think about, again, sort of, let's say, upper room germicidal UV for infectious agents. You can think about similar types of strategies for pollutant agents as well. But it is absolutely true that the challenge of creating safe indoor air in the context of outdoor or ambient air that is polluted or unsafe is obviously very challenging. Thank you so much.
Right, thank you. So essentially what you're saying is it's a multi-pronged approach. We need to address ambient air pollution, but in terms of indoor air pollution, we need to think of innovative ways, but of course, cost would be a major factor and it may not be affordable to most people. So I think we need to look at ways and means of reducing the cost of those things. But most important is to protect people with disease, people with heart failure, people with who had a heart attack or a stroke. They are more likely to get affected. So we need to protect them, and a simple mask is one of the solutions. Plus, if we can manage to get a very low cost air purifier, I think ICMR is actually trying to get that along with IIT and others. I think it will be a great boon if we can try and get that. Moving on, Terry, I have a question for you. The recent Lancet Commission report says that worldwide 900,000 deaths are caused by lead. The report came just 2 weeks back. I was kind of intrigued by the fact in all your studies in which you have measured metals, heavy metals in PM 2.5, lead was not mentioned at all. So what was the reason for that, and why do you think that happened?
I'm not sure I can have a satisfactory answer for that. It is surprising. Lead was a minor factor throughout everything that I've done, except when I did a fireworks study and lead popped up as the #1 metal that was associated with oxidative stress in cell studies. It's surprising. It's well known how toxic lead is, whether it's oral ingestion or inhalation. So I don't have a satisfactory answer. And I don't want to do the usual academic, we need more research, but.
So Professor Bhargav wants
I think much of his work is talking about copper, and copper is another important element, which traditionally in India, we have used copper vessels in the past. Copper has antimicrobicidal properties. India has no copper. India doesn't produce copper. So pollution with copper is going to be minimal in India. That is one point. Whole of the Western world has copper pipes for water supply. And that is why you can drink the water straight from the tap in the Western world, because that is copper pipes. And that is an area which we don't have in India. We have lead pipes, and we have now the pipes which are of Astral and whatever, those poly things. So copper is a big problem in the country. We really need copper, and we try to get it from China. We need it for air conditioners. We need it. And most importantly, if we want a safe water supply, we will need a lot of copper. And then again, we will go to that PM 2.5 is having copper in India. And
yeah, I think we'll be doing that kind of a speciation analysis in our study, which we're going to conduct across multiple parts of the country. So I think we'll get some data on that very soon. Thank you, Terry. Moving on, Professor Thurston. One question that I have is what is the interaction with poverty, structural determinants, housing, and so on? How does air pollution worsen amongst people living in poor conditions?
Among people working in what?
In poorer parts of the world, poorer, social determinants such as poverty, poor housing, crowded housing, overcrowded places. Does air pollution have a higher impact in these populations as compared to?
Well, first of all, the mix of pollutants are different. But also, when I've visited India, the housing, that I've been in, much more open. In other words, the weather is more conducive to opening the windows and having ventilation that way, rather than closing it up and having air conditioning and the like. So that allows, I would guess that there's more permeation of indoors from outdoors in developing world countries for that reason. And then there's the question of indoor pollution, which we've alluded to, where the cooking if you're cooking using fossil fuels or biomass, that generates a lot of pollution indoors. So then you have indoor sources in addition to outdoor. And we have the same problem, in the West, have historically, with people using natural gas cooking, which causes nitrogen dioxide and does affect children's lung development. So that's why people are switching over more to electric cooking, which can, again, that has cultural implications. If you tried to get a US, a person who liked to charbroil steaks and said, oh, well, we're going to switch you over to boiled steaks, that would not be popular. People wouldn't like that. So changing the way you cook food also changes the way it tastes, and that has cultural challenges that vary from country to country. I don't know if that's exactly what you're asking, but
yeah, I think what is important is it's a very complex issue. There's no clear answer for this, and overall economic improvement actually can bring about many of the changes that we desire to have. So it's a very complex issue.
And varies from country to country. Country to country has their own unique cultural, norms, and then you have to address that. And so there's no one size fits all. The only thing I could think of, is that the more we can generate electricity from clean sources, green electricity, and have people switching over to electricity for heating and cooking and the like, you're going to solve a lot of problems that way.
Right. I think you brought out a very important issue. Actually, there is this clean cook stove trial which was conducted internationally, which was neutral. It was did not show benefits because people use it for warm, heating water and not cooking. So that's the kind of thing. Before I go to the audience, let me ask Dr. Habib a question. Are we moving away from PM 2.5 to PM 1? Is that where the science is going?
Yeah, so as we have evidence that the very fine and ultrafine particles, which is PM1 or less, and even 100 nanometer or less, are more toxic than PM 2.5 as a whole. Probably that is because of the composition of these particles, which are ultrafine and very fine, is very toxic in nature because of probably the metals, trace metals they have. We have found that cadmium is one of the major metal in PM 2.5. Cadmium is very toxic in nature. And because of the resuspension of dust in India, we have also found lead in particulate matter. So we think that if a regulatory body focus just on PM 2.5, it will not be enough from health point of view.
Right.
Can I say something about the mitigation
Sure.
related question you have asked?
Yeah.
So our group, actually my PhD is on emission inventory development. So we are also working on emission inventory or total emission estimate from India from various sources. And as rightly said by Dr. Bhargav, that Ujjwala Yojana has affected the energy use in India, and it has reduced the fuel wood use by 15% and increased the LPG use. At the same time, the CAG report says that the refilling of the cylinder is low among the population. So if that is strengthened and government monitors that policy very closely, probably the improvement will be more than what we are seeing right now. Regarding the mitigation, the source apportionment studies have reported that the resuspension of dust and vehicular emission are mostly most important sources in cities. And therefore, the mitigation or the using the control devices in vehicular to control vehicular emission, especially trucks, like DPF, diesel particulate filter should be used, or the control devices like which can control NOx and SOx emission from the vehicle should be used, because that gives the secondary particle formation. So that is another way to reduce the pollution. Other than that, the large industry, even power generation, from power generation we get generally more SO2, sulfur dioxide, and the control devices like ESP is being used in power generation plant where PM 2.5 is being controlled. However, there should be some devices for gaseous pollutant control should be there, so the secondary formation can be reduced, therefore the total emission.
I think we might require another big panel discussion to address all these issues. Thank you very much for bringing out this. Though we are at the end of time, I think it will be unfair not to allow the audience to ask a few questions. So please raise your hand, identify yourself, and please keep the questions brief.
Yeah, my name is GB Bagai. As a non-technical person, I have two questions. Number one, you said that India adopts health measures much faster, but the fact remains that Delhi remains the most polluted city in the world. And is it a fact that pollution-related mortality is the worst in Delhi? That's one question. And second question I have is that if you see greenery, it seems to be doing better than ever. Is it because the new leaves have taken measures to improve their immunity, and therefore because they keep changing, the new generation is healthier and is able to tackle pollution? And does that affect the same generation as well? Because they say if you use purifiers, you're going to reduce your immunity and get more affected by pollution.
So the second question first, I think regarding the effect of greenery, there is a lot of interest in seeing how plants take over this issue of oxidative stress and air pollution. And I know one group which is actually doing the study because they use the lockdown as a period, as you saw the Utah study, where during the factory strike, they had a decrease in asthma during, and then it came up. That is a very classical study which has been shown clearly that when you have decrease in air pollution because of the mill being closed, asthma rates came down. So lockdown was also used to see what happens to plants in terms of their stress. And this is an ongoing study. So plants, I think, adapt much better to pollution than we as humans do. Then they have a different system in terms of how they take care of pollutants and get rid of them. And like you said, especially those because of leaf shedding and new leaves coming, that could also be one factor. But there is studies going on in that direction. And that also binds to the whole concept of what was mentioned, One Health. When you're looking at One Health, you're looking at health of the planet. It includes animals, plants, and human health. And they're all interlinked. The last 20 years, this century actually has had outbreaks predominantly of zoonotic infections. SARS, MERS, Ebola, H1N1, Zika, all have jumped species and caused human. So with this century has actually had more outbreaks than we've seen in the past because of zoonotic infection. And that's why One Health is important. Coming to Delhi, yes, the data does suggest that. And that's why it's important to really understand pollution, not in terms of just PM 2.5, but the effect of the particles that you're having. How dangerous are they? How does it affect our own health? And what is it causing in terms of, because you see, whatever you talk of is an estimate. You can say so-and-so died because of COVID-19. His RT-PCR was positive. I can't say so-and-so died because of air pollution. You have no definite test to say that this person died because of air pollution. It's only worsening of your underlying comorbidities, coronary artery disease, COPD, or getting a respiratory infection, landing up on a ventilator. So that is why it's important for us to be able to, so it's what we call a silent killer. We have another ongoing epidemic or pandemic of air pollution, which is a silent killer. And the estimates that are based on data from the West and the effect that they could have. How true they are is something that we really need to establish. That's why it's something that is a cause of concern. We need to address it, but we need more definite data, both from particulate matter. And as was said, that aerosols are good also. All inhalers that we use the same technology in terms of size of the particle, whether we want the bronchodilator to go to the airways or we want it to go to the alveoli. It's the particle size that matters. You look at whether you want to have what we call turbulent flow in the large airways or laminar flow in the small airways. But that's why it's important for us to address this. But like I said, these are all estimates, but the burden of disease is definitely significant. But we need more data.
Now, one point which I wanted to add to that is one way of looking at is if we have a good death registration, what we can do is we can look at non-suicidal and homicidal mortality and look at how much higher the mortality is on a highly polluted day. And it's been shown that it's higher. I think estimates suggest anywhere between 30 to 60,000 higher deaths per year in India because of air pollution. But as Dr. Guleria is saying, that's just an estimate. And you will have to look at many other factors that would influence that kind of number.
I would probably agree with you regarding the use of air purifiers and decrease of your immunity. So this question remains unanswered. And I don't think any one of the experts can say whether we really need an air purifier inside the house. First of all, we do not know what is the particle containing. Cadmium was alluded to, lead has been alluded to. How much it is inside your house, we do not know. I do not know how many people have measured ambient. And we have seen with the Ujjwala, with firewood, which was being used inside the house. That is probably not being used in Delhi households. So from that perspective, whether the use of an air purifier is going to be of value is open to question.
So I think that's why we are doing this trial funded by you. So Dr. Nitish Naik is the PI of that. Yes, sir. No. First, let's not jump the queue.
Dr. Guleria, for quite some time, we people are using RO water. That is also quite harmful for the body because most of the elements are being removed. And the way you said PM2, because of CNG, we have more asthmatic problems than earlier with the petroleum and diesel. So that means this CNG is much more harmful. And future we will be having electric buses and electric vehicle. And we don't have any solution to dispose of the lead and other batteries. So how to deal this type of situation?
So each solution will have its other problems also, which will come up.
Yeah.
And like you rightly said, it's finding how you can improve things from what they are today, but you will have other issues which will come up. It's true for example, with a lot of, we now have our smartphones, we have our computers, laptops, but this has led to a huge issue of e-waste. What we change our laptops and computers so regularly. What about those old big computers that we had? All of them have got disposed, but that is added on to the waste on the planet in terms of e-waste. So there would be problems, and new solutions will also come out as far as that is concerned. But it's looking at what I would say is the lesser evil, if I put it that way.
Right.
I think that point again, I'd just add that even electric vehicles are supposed to be more polluting when you brake them and accelerate them more. The particles which are released are more when they are braking and accelerating more. So that also is as we saw with CNG. Initially, we thought it's magic. Then we found that it is having some problems. Similarly, looking at electrical vehicles, probably it's a magic, but again, they'll find some effects. So, life goes on. We have to find, as Dr. Randeep is saying, the lesser evil.
Right. Thank you. I think, please, yeah, sure, but brief question.
Very brief.
Yeah.
Doctor, most of us here are probably 65 plus. And COVID vaccination is good enough, but for influenza and pneumonia, we've heard that there is a preventive vaccination available for people who are 65 plus. We would like you to first of all organize for all of us. It will be very good. We'll take it and we'll pay for it. And also whether we've taken COVID, so do we need the influenza or the pneumonia, or will it be covered? Will it be all inclusive? Otherwise, we'll take the pneumonia preventive.
So not as of now. As of now, you will have to take your annual flu shot, the influenza vaccine, which is a quadrivalent vaccine. It covers 2 influenza B and 2 influenza A strain. And that is an annual vaccine because the virus also has what we call an antigenic drift every year, and therefore you need a new vaccine. And we have in India, I won't go into the details because a lot of us, including ICMR, was involved in when should be the ideal timing of the vaccine. We would say that you should take a pre-winter vaccine. But the vaccine classically in India, if you look at influenza, we have 2 peaks. We have a monsoon peak and we have a winter peak. So we also have been advocating a pre-monsoon schedule. So you can take one of those schedules. The pre-winter vaccine is a Northern Hemisphere vaccine. And the Southern Hemisphere vaccine, which is winter in let's say in South Africa and Australia, comes somewhere around April. So follow one cycle and take it annually, because there's no tropical vaccine, either it's a Northern Hemisphere vaccine or Southern Hemisphere. The second issue is your pneumococcal vaccine. You have a conjugate vaccine, PCV13, which is once in a lifetime. And then you need to take the Pneumovac 23, which is once in 5 years till the age of 65. And that's about it.
So I think, sorry, no follow-up question, because we're going to make it rapid fire now. Quick question, 1, 2, and 3, and then we just finish it. No more questions.
Can I ask now?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. My question, first of all, I'm Dr. Rajiv Kumar Jain. I'm on the management board of Scientific Committee on Epidemiology and Occupational Health of the International Commission on Occupational Health. My question relates to what was said, the 2 issues which were alluded to, complementary epidemiology and industrial hygiene. Now, these 2 sciences are very underdeveloped in India. Now, especially in your IIT Delhi, have you had a look at the practices of industrial hygiene in the factories where aerosol of different sizes and compositions are produced and are managed through these devices, even N95 and N99 as well? And what has been the effect in different workers and the residents around those factories? There are a number of factories are in North India and even in Punjab, Haryana, and Delhi, which produce measurable quantity of PM1, PM2.5, and PM10 having different compositions. Would it not be useful to gather the data regarding the composition and relative composition of PM1, PM2.5, and PM10,
Right.
and also the load, the effect on the workers and their family members? Would it not be a useful data set for the studies that you are carrying out? Dr. Ghazala Habib, please.
Yeah.
Right.
So I agree with you that the data set will be very useful. However, in India, the studies related to occupational exposure are very limited. Basically, some of the studies have been done with biomass cookie stove in rural India. But yeah, we need more exposure, occupational exposure data for industries and also for other microenvironments. And the second thing is the PM mass concentration is not available, so the composition is also not available. Right now, the use of mask, this N95 and all, we are trying to see if these masks are efficient in just retaining the particle, or they also change, or they also reduce the composition of liquid particle, liquid components, or like metal component and so on. So that is another study which is going on in IIT Delhi. And Sathi, under Sathi grant, DST has given us a big grant of 4.7 crore to establish a facility where all this air purifier, mask, they can be evaluated for their performance of PM mass reduction and composition change. So that we will have something.
Thank you.
So, good evening to all the learned faculty. I'm Dr. Kanika Chandra. I am from the Palliative Medicine Department in Gangaram Hospital. My question to Dr. Guleri and Dr. Bhargava, post-COVID, and still COVID is lurking, so we cannot downplay the risk of COVID, plus the pollution that is ever rising. Any blanket preventive measures for the elderly and for the adolescent population? And another sub part of this question would be, we are seeing a lot of young hypertensives and a lot of cardiac issues in young people. So is it a part of pollution, or is it just because of the N95 and vigorous activity that people are doing? What exactly do we owe this to?
I think the major thing that has to be done is the use of mass vaccination. That has to be done for your elderly and adolescents. In terms of young hypertensives, yes, we are seeing an epidemic of hypertension in the country. We're seeing it from the pre-COVID days. We are seeing it at about 25% in urban areas and up to 50% in rural areas. But more important is we are diagnosing more hypertensives also, and we need to treat them also more accurately. It is a treatable condition. Don't need to know that, but it is not related to COVID. We all know about the new syndrome of long COVID, but I'm still not able to find how to diagnose long COVID. Anything new can be attributed to COVID and is being attributed to COVID, but there is no diagnostic test to say that this is long COVID. But I think Dr. Guleri can put more light on it.
Okay, I'll just briefly. One is, of course, I think Dr. Bhagan showed his paper and study which showed that there was a link between pollution and rise in blood pressure. But along with that, there are multiple factors which could be related to lifestyle. And as was mentioned, more awareness and therefore diagnosing it more than what was done in the past. Regarding what should we do in the extremes of age, I think vaccination is the most important thing, including the boosters when it is required and following COVID appropriate behavior.
So with regard to hypertension, I just wanted to add, actually that data is after adjustment for several lifestyle factors, include alcohol consumption, physical activity, salt consumption, everything was adjusted for.
Despite all of that.
Despite all of that, you have that higher
yes.
level.
I was trying to say that with that and all of the other factors, you may still have a further rise.
Yeah, that's true. You adjust for all the other factors, and despite that, that 3 millimeter higher level is there for every 25 microgram.
Say to add high salt intake, let me put it that way.
Then
it may go up further.
You add high salt intake, you add high alcohol intake, reduce physical activity, low fruit and vegetable intake. All of that will multiply and increase your.
That's what I was saying.
And you're finding so much of alcohol in Delhi now. That's becoming more and more inexpensive.
Yeah,
the use has become much more. So you will get more hypertension.
So do things from your end while the regulators will try from their end. So last question, Dr. Bhandari, you have the last question.
I just wanted to.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. You're there.
I wanted to thank the organizers for a fantastic talk and the panel for giving their time to explain a really complex topic to us. My name is Danish. I'm a doctor and a public health specialist. My question is related to the launch of the public health cadre, which the government of India has endorsed, which is a step in the right direction. And as you rightly said, we are very progressive in taking action in the right direction. So I just wanted to ask for your views if you think that the public health management cadre may provide us some opportunity to address air pollution in some capacity, and what might that be? Thank you.
So I think it's going to be very important to have a public health cadre because air pollution is multi-sectorial. It needs involvement from multiple sectors, and it also needs solutions which are practical, cost-effective, and it needs to have a good ability for people to be able to communicate. Because if you look at crop burning, one of the big major issues is the issue of trying to communicate the problem that is there in terms of the effect of crop burning and the health effects that it has. So cost-effective solutions which are practical, which are acceptable, good communication, and crosstalk between various agencies, ministries, policymakers, scientists. And that's why public health becomes very important, because that message can only go through if you have a very important public health component in it.
Right. Dr. Bhandari, last question.
So I'm Dr. Bhandari, a cardiologist. Thank you, Nayak and Prabhakaran, for having me here. My question to Dr. Guleria is that, are we going to have N95 ever for Delhi post-COVID as well? Because that's the only effective way. And second, to Dr. Balram or Prabhakaran, is that given the high level of your pollutants in the atmosphere, so is exercising outside a good thing, or should we have indoor air-conditioned or HEPA-filtered places where high-intensity exercise can be done?
Okay, the first question was for me. So I would say that for quite some time, we will probably need to have our masks on, or the N95, until we are out of the woods, and maybe even after that. And there is data which also shows that to some extent, it is also protective as far as air pollution is concerned. So if you're having a city like Delhi, where pollution levels are very high, wearing a mask, especially during the winter months, may not be that bad a thing.
Right. I think we should conclude. But before concluding, there are a few comments and questions on the chat box. Most of them.
I think there was a second question on exercise.
I think exercising. Outdoors.
Indoor exercise.
With a HEPA filter indoor is probably utopian, and I would advise that, and that may lead to your decrease in immunity, for all you know. So it may be wise to exercise in the winter months when it's very polluted, probably with a mask. And otherwise, and that is only for Delhi. So outside of Delhi, exercising anywhere is fine.
Yeah. Right. I think exercise is important because the benefits of exercise far outweigh some of the effects of milder levels of air pollution, not the high levels that we have.
Time for exercise.
Yeah.
So not very early when you're in winter, when smog is there, when the sun is out and pollution level comes down, you could still.
Right. There are several comments, but I'm not going to read out all the comments. A few things. One question that has been asked is how to advocate for air pollution better and communicate precautionary measures. Maybe I'll take it. I think one of the things that we make a mistake is saying that we give good education and people will learn. The fact is that they gain knowledge but don't change their practices. there are three things in terms of behavior change communication. So we should provide the information to people so that they say, I know. We should empower them so that they say, I can. And we should make them advocate so that they say, I want. But for all of this, we need to provide an enabling environment. If you don't have the path, the footpaths to walk, you don't have parks which are safe, even if they are there, people are not going to do. So I think we need to address those kind of issues to provide an enabling environment. Then there are a few other things like why doesn't the government recognize NGOs, which are being very active? So I think this is always asked. Yes, we'll appeal to the government to recognize. And some of the questions have been answered by Terry Gordon. Thank you, Terry, for answering those questions. With that, I think all good things have. What's the comment of George Thurston? Can you read it out, Samyata? He's responding to a question, so it's fine. I think what we will do is we'll give every panelist 30 seconds, just 30 seconds to talk, to give their perspective on anything that has been discussed so far. We'll start with Professor Bhargav. Only 30 seconds, please.
I think particulate matter is a definite problem. We need to be aware of it and try to do advocacy to reduce it. However, it should not be a paranoia. And government schemes like Ujjwala have been a successful schemes, and those are the kind of things we need to do, large interventions. We can keep on continuing to do studies, which we should, to collect more and more data, but interventions are more important.
Right. Thank you.
So I just say that we have enough data to say that air pollution is bad, but we need to find practical solutions which are doable in our own country and address our own situation. That is not going to happen from solutions from the West. So that is something that we need to work on. And I think the situation should be to find practical solutions rather than doing anything else.
Right.
I think the particulate matter has problem that we all know, but the immediate solution is to apply the existing control technology in various sources. And we need a very comprehensive epidemiological as well as health monitoring studies along with the particle composition and characteristics, assessment. That is what is needed to develop the dose response curve, which is regionally relevant for India. That is the need of the.
Right. Thank you. Rajesh.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me just first comment that really remarkable passion, energy, and investment that I've witnessed on the part of not just the speakers and panelists, but really the audience members, both there live as well as those who have joined virtually. So I just wish to say thank you so much for all of the passion and energy, really remarkable to see. And I would just say it's our challenge now to channel that passion and energy into solutions. And I do agree with the comments that have been made that research obviously is important, but really implementation and making change happen is really critical at this time. And it will require a whole of society or whole of government response. We have to move beyond just the medical field and engage engineers, engage business, and engage regulators and policymakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajesh. Multidisciplinarity is the buzzword. Terry?
Yeah, just briefly, I think that there's hope. We have to reduce the air pollution. It's pretty clear. And I think electrification, as Dr. Dathan mentioned, is the key. If we're going to do these things, filter particles, get rid of fossil fuels in transportation, then we need to have a near miracle change in electrification.
Right, thank you. George?
Yes, I was going to say something similar. I do think that that this whole idea of leaping technologies that was mentioned earlier, I think by Rajesh, but is the way to go. In other words, try and avoid the mistakes made by previously developed countries. I use that word very loosely there, but and to step ahead and hopefully we can develop technologies and skip the mistakes of relying on fossil fuels so heavily and go to cleaner technologies and leapfrog into the future as a way to reduce the problem of this pollution exposure. And I guess the only other thing I just wanted to reiterate, I do find while the burning of the stubble creates pollution and it's not good for you, the studies that I've done and others have done it's not as bad as it looks compared to the pollution from the industrial and fossil fuel particles. So prioritizing cleaning the air, I think that really you do have to try and focus on the fossil fuels and maybe not take on the farmers, because I think lately we've seen you don't want to mess with the farmers, right?
Right. Thank you. Thank you. I think all good things have to come to an end. Before I hand over to Samyata to give a vote of thanks, I just wanted to end with a quote by a German philosopher. His name is von Goethe. He said, "Knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must act." I think we have enough knowledge now, and we have enough desire. Time has come to act on air pollution and aerosols and whatever bad things that are there in the environment. So thank you very much. And Nitish, you want to say anything before we hand over to?
No, I would like to. It's been a very informative session, and I think so all things have to come to an end. And I would like to now invite Samyata to give the concluding remarks and vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I would like to thank the organizing team at the India International Center at the Public Health Foundation of India and some of our colleagues at NYU. Thank you, Dr. Naik, for hosting this session. A big thank you to all our panelists and speakers and our chair, Dr. Prabhakaran, Dr. Randeep Guleria, Dr. Balram Bhargav, Dr. Ghazala Habib, and our international panelists joining us from New York University, Dr. George Thurston, Dr. Terry Gordon, and Dr. Rajesh Vedantan. Most importantly, we thank our esteemed audience here, members of the IIC and other institutions who've gathered today to make this event a great success. Thank you.
We also need to thank all the people who have given background support, like people who looked at the audio visual, the Zoom, and many people who helped organize this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.